Well, good morning, church. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the sun's still working its way out, but I feel like we're all a little quiet this morning. Is that just me? It's not a bad thing, I suppose, but maybe we were all got a little too much sun this past week or something. I don't know. But before I get into the message this morning, I do have a happy order of business to share a second reading that Tina Costello is going to be transferring in membership from the Orange Coast FCA Church to our church. It's already gone through the board, so if we would like to welcome her, can I just get a hearty amen? Amen. Thank you. So Tina, you're welcome as a part of this family. We're so glad to have you here. And now, once again, I'd like to say good morning, church, and welcome. Happy Sabbath. Hopefully, all of you have been enjoying your summers so far. I know sometimes, believe it or not, it's already middle of July. That's kind of crazy, I know, but it's okay. We'll still have some summer left, don't worry. But it's interesting, as I was thinking about enjoying the summer, I was reflecting on some of my time in that I lived in Denver, Colorado. I lived in Denver, Colorado for most of my high school years, or for most of my teenage years. And there's something fantastic about living in Denver, Colorado, because the Rocky Mountains are to your west. And there's this wonderful thing called the sun that moves through the sky and sets directly behind them. And so what it ends up is, almost on a nightly basis, you end up with the most gorgeous, jaw-dropping, breathtaking sunsets. I mean, seriously, if you've never been to Denver to experience one, it's worth it. It's incredible. There's more than just weed there, I promise. And it's fantastic. It's wonderful. But the thing is, when you live there for many years, there's this thing called the law of diminishing returns. And you start to see these sunsets over and over again, and while it's not that they're getting any less beautiful, you've seen it before, and it's not until somebody would move there. And it was funny, the words they would use is, how do you guys live like this? How do you live with this beauty every single night, these beautiful sunsets? And you would say, oh yeah, those sunsets are pretty beautiful, those sunsets are pretty wonderful, and then you would be reminded to appreciate it. And so now, this morning, as somebody who didn't grow up here, I'd like to remind you that there is a beach right over there that is beautiful, that people travel from all over the world to see, and maybe you've been there your whole life, but take advantage of the summer. Go see a beautiful sunset on the beach. I encourage you to take advantage, get some sand in your toes, and but hopefully, however you're spending your summer. Let me see, is this mic still on? Is the white mic still on? Okay. That's why I just wasn't sure if it was speeding back into that, but however you're spending your summer, whether you're going to the beach, whether you're traveling, whether you're stuck in summer school, whether summer doesn't exist for you anymore, that was a thing of the past, we're glad that you're here with us this morning. And if you were here with us last week, it's okay if you weren't, but last week you got to hear our head elder, Barbara, share some stories about when she led whitewater rafting when she was young, which, believe it or not, was not that long ago. And she shared some stories about time on the river, about fishing, about making her way down the river, and connected it to the idea of us being called to be fishers of men. How do we answer the call that Christ has given us to be called to action? And so that theme we're going to be continuing with a little bit this morning. We're going to be talking a little bit about water. We're going to be talking a little bit about fish. We're going to be talking a little bit about fishermen, and a little bit about the call to action that Christ gives us. So we're going to be spending some time this week, today, and also next week when it's our VBS Sabbath. Once again, if you haven't heard the many announcements so far, it's VBS this week. We're so excited. If you're not already involved, you should be involved, and we want to have you involved. But we are going to be spending some time this week and next Sabbath as well looking at the book of Matthew. And what I want to invite you to do right now is go to Matthew chapter 4. This afternoon, I said that wrong. What I want to invite you to do this afternoon is to go to Matthew chapter 4 and read the story of where Jesus calls the fishermen to become a fisher of men. But right now what we're going to be looking at is Matthew chapter 16. There you go. Matthew chapter 16. And some time has passed since Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus called Peter to be a fisher of men. And now some things have happened. Peter has seen some things. There's been a few chapters of the Gospel of Matthew that have taken place since Jesus called Peter. So now we're getting to a point where Peter can finally make some confident statements about who Jesus is, about who this person that he's been following around, been listening to, been spending time with, who he really is. So chapter 16 of Matthew, verses 13 through 16 is where we're going to start. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And at this point, Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus asked, "Who is it that you think that I am? You guys are the one who's spending time with me, who've been listening to me, who've been walking and talking and doing life with me. Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter is the one who pipes up, and he confidently says that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it should be interesting to you this morning that Peter is the one who answers the question. And he answers it pretty confidently as well. This is not a question you would want to get wrong, or an answer you would want to give wrong, especially not in Bible times Israel. This would be blasphemy of the highest degree if you were wrong. And Peter is confident enough to say, "Yes, Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter has seen enough in the events of the past 12 chapters of Matthew, give or take, to see who Jesus is and to share confidently what his perspective of who Jesus is. One of the keys to me right here, though, is that while Peter is the one that answers, almost assuredly not everyone in this group that's standing here gathered as Jesus is speaking to them had the same understanding or the same perspective as Peter at this point. And that's important for us to remember, because even if we all here this morning believe in Jesus, even if we call ourselves an Adventist, even if we are among our own family members, our loved ones, people who think and act and talk like we do, we are all going to have different perspectives or understandings of who Jesus really is. Why is that? Because we all have different relationships with Jesus. We have different perspectives. It's like the analogy of going to see a beautiful sunset. If you and I were in Denver, Colorado at the same lookout point, at the same point in time with the same weather, and we were there together and we saw the clouds and the sun hitting in exact the same way, you and I would try to describe it to somebody else and it wouldn't sound the same. We may get some of the key features similar, but it would be different, right? Even though we saw the same thing with our own eyes, different things would stand out to us. Even if we went to an art gallery, and saw a beautiful painting, and we said, "You know what, this is a still painting. Nothing's changing. It is what it is. It's been painted. It's up on the wall now. Nothing's changed." But if we went to try to recreate it or to try to describe it for somebody else, it would almost assuredly be different. It would sound different. It would look different, because you and I would have different elements of this painting or this image or this sunset that would be sticking out to us differently for any variety of reasons. It's like if your history, your life story, your life experiences led you to notice different things about that sunset. In the same way, your life story, your history, and your life experiences, and the way that God has shown himself to you specifically, that defines your image that you have of God, your image of Jesus. And although we may agree on some of the big points of who Jesus was and is today, different aspects of his character are going to stand out differently to each one of us based on whatever our experiences are, whatever it is that God has done to show himself to us in our lives, and whatever God is giving to each one of us individually. And Peter is here sharing what his perspective is, and he gets it right. He gets it right, which is almost more impressive than the statement that he himself makes, because Peter was not an educated man. If you know anything about Peter, especially at this point in his life, he's not the person that you would expect to get this answer correct, to say, Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You are who you are. You are the one who has come to save us, not just from the Romans, but for lots of reasons. Peter wasn't an educated man. He didn't have the same understandings or knowledge of New Testament scriptures at his disposal that even some of the other disciples around him would have had. Peter was not an educated man. He was a fisherman. All that he did to be able to make this statement, to be able to confidently declare who Jesus was he did life with Jesus. He lived with Jesus. He walked, he talked, he ate, and he did everything with Jesus. He got to listen to Jesus talk. He got to see how Jesus acted. He got to see with his own eyes, to develop his own perspective, truthfully, of who Jesus was. And it wasn't that someone told him who Jesus was, or even that somebody told him what they thought or who they thought Jesus was. It was his personal relationship with Jesus that convinced him who Jesus was. And maybe there's a lesson for us here this morning with this, because I know that probably some of us are struggling with our faith in different ways. Perhaps we feel like we don't actually have that living, breathing belief within our souls. Perhaps you feel like you just say what you believe because that's what you were told to believe. Perhaps you grew up with a certain belief and that's what's comfortable. Or perhaps you are simply believing, but it just doesn't feel alive within you. You don't feel the passion. It doesn't feel like it's quite real. Well, Peter here shows us the path to true belief, to conviction. It's not just by amassing knowledge, although studying your Bible and knowing it front to back can be a good thing. It's not just about surrounding yourself with people who want to tell you what to think, although surrounding yourselves with people to encourage you and who are sharing your pursuit and desire for seeking the truth, that can be a good thing. But it's not just about those things. It's not and has never been about anything other than you developing a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And how do you do that? You may be asking. Because it would be one thing for me as a pastor to get up here and say, everybody needs a relationship with Jesus. But in church, sometimes our church language makes sense to those of us who have heard church language before, but it doesn't really make sense if you either haven't heard it before or if you kind of take the time to think about it. Because it would be easy for me to say, yes, let's all let Jesus into our hearts this morning. Or that Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart, let him in. And we would probably, those of us who are familiar with church, who have grown up and are used to church language, or familiar with Jesus, we would say, yes, of course, let's all let Jesus into our hearts. But somebody who isn't familiar with that might be sitting there and say, how does that work? Into my heart? Like physically? Is there really a room in my heart? And if they're at all medical, they might be a little concerned about that we thought we were letting Jesus into our hearts. And so when we talk about letting Jesus into our heart, we're obviously talking about more than just the physical aspect. We're talking about letting Jesus into the center of your life, into the center of your being. And in the same way, when we talk about wanting to have a relationship with Jesus, we're talking about you developing something that makes sense for you. Because your relationship with Jesus is going to look different from the people around you. You see, some people struggle because maybe your dad was one of those people that wakes up at 4 a.m. before work and sits and goes through the adult Sabbath school quarterly and goes and studies, and that's how he stays connected to God every day. And that's a wonderful thing. But then you tried that and you said, that doesn't work. I don't want to wake up at 4 a.m. just for that, especially if I can wake up at 5. Or maybe you had people you've heard the discussion, the debates, is it better to have devotionals in the morning or in the evening? Or maybe some people, it's not about the devotionals. Maybe it's about the acts of service. And they find wonderful joy, like the Moedelli family, where they find joy helping their communities. The people who are without homes, who are in need. And maybe you've tried that and you felt good about it, but it's not your way that you connect with Jesus. And it's not that the other thing is bad, it's just that you are going to have your own different and individual relationship with Jesus. Does that make sense? Because it's like love languages. Maybe if I'm in a relationship, my love language is words of affirmation, and another person is gift giving. It's not that our love is better or worse than the other ones, but when it comes to Jesus, he says, I want to meet you where you're at. And maybe the way that you're going to have the best relationship with me is by spending time in Bible study with me. Maybe the best way that you're going to connect with me is by listening to Christian music, worship music. Maybe the way that you're going to connect with me is taking a nice Sabbath nap, and that's okay. Whatever it is, you need to figure out what your individual love language is with Jesus. How is it that you connect with him? Jesus wants a relationship with you, but he's going to speak and interact with you on an individual basis. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That means that if you tried something that your parents, it worked for them, or you try something that your friend or your church friend member also tried, if you try it and it doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't work. It just means that method of you connecting with him doesn't work, right? So we have to actually take action, take time, be intentional to figure out how is it that God speaks to me? How is it that I can form a relationship with Jesus? Maybe it could be time spent away from the noise of life, spent in prayer. It could be time spent surrounded by family or loved ones. It could be time spent in devotional and study. It could be just time spent in worship at church. Whatever it may be, the cure to FOMO, or fear of missing out on faith, is to have a living, breathing, actual faith, is to take action, to follow the model of Peter, to follow the path of Peter. The answer to your faith feeling dead is to actually go to the fountain of living water and drink from it. Get some Jesus in your life. Spend time with your Lord, your Savior, and your friend. He wants the relationship with you. He's willing to meet you wherever you're at with whatever you need, but you have to initiate that. You have to initiate that. So our first lesson or note for today is that in order to do what Peter did, we have to spend time with Jesus, to have our relationship with him. Not just what your parents or your family or what you were told to have a relationship with him in just that way, but what works for you. How does Jesus connect to you? And when Peter takes action, when he makes the declaration of faith as a response and as a result of his relationship with Jesus, Christ affirms and responds to him. So now let's jump back to Matthew chapter 16. We're going to look now at verse 17. And Jesus answered him. Jesus answered him, speaking to Peter. Peter just said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you," Jesus says, "Simon Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And let's go to the next slide as well, so we continue reading. "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. That last verse is one that we could spend a whole sermon looking at and digesting, and we probably still wouldn't find the answer, so we're not going to focus on that this morning. But again, something that may be good for your personal study to look at as well. But Jesus replies to the faith that Peter expresses when Peter says confidently, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus affirms what Peter says. He knows what kind of faith it is, where Peter is coming from. He knows that Peter isn't faking it here. He isn't just telling Jesus what Jesus wants to hear. Peter's probably not smart enough to do that. Peter's declaration of faith is coming not from being told to say who Jesus is, but out of the abiding relationship that Peter has with Jesus as his disciple. And it's for this reason that Jesus so strongly affirms Peter. He so strongly says to him, "Things of this world have not revealed this to you, but rather God my Father who is in heaven. And because of that, I'm going to give you the keys to heaven. Anything that you do here, Peter, it's going to have an effect on heaven. It's going to have an effect on all eternity, and the gates of hell, the powers of hell, won't be able to stand against what you do. That's a powerful, powerful affirmation. I will build my church on you, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Don't you want that kind of faith? The kind of faith that Jesus looks at you and he sees that you're not faking it. He sees that you have true faith, living, breathing faith. And if you don't have that this morning, I'm not here to discourage you, but actually just the opposite. I'm here to encourage you, to tell you that it's easier than you may think to get this kind of faith. All it takes is not you passing a certain test or exam. You don't have to be even a faithful attender of church. It's a great method to get into a relationship with Jesus, to be attending church, and to be with people who are also seeking Jesus and a relationship with him. But the only thing that you have to do, the first thing that you have to do, is build your own personal relationship with Jesus. Spend time with him. Try out prayer. Try some different methods of prayer. Try listening to some different music. Find what it is that works for you, for Jesus to interact with you. Create a space for him to interact with you. And then see how your relationship will grow from there. And once you build that relationship, eventually you'll find yourself like Peter, confidently saying, "You are the Messiah. You are my Savior. I believe in you and I want to worship you, God." All you have to do is answer the call that Peter did initially in Matthew chapter 4. "Come, follow me." And Peter left his nets and followed Jesus. All you have to do is answer yes. Answer yes. And here's the beautiful thing about what life looks like on the other side of this faith. When Jesus sees you enter into this true, real kind of faith, when Jesus sees you enter into a true, living, breathing relationship with him, he will affirm you, and he'll do what he did to Peter, and he'll turn you into a rock. Now, believe it or not, you may not know this, but everybody here this morning, everybody around the world, every single human being that has ever existed has wanted to be a rock. It may not sound that appealing, you may not believe it at first, you may not have realized it, but it's what every human deeply craves, is to be a rock. Because as human beings, as people, we know life is fragile. Whether we experience it for ourselves, whether we've lost loved ones, whether we've seen loved ones go through pain, whether we've experienced pain ourselves, whether even nothing related to human beings, things that we put time and effort into just disintegrate in front of us, we know that life is fragile. These things in life are fragile. And so what we as human beings crave is certainty. We crave things that will stand, that will be certain no matter what happens in life. We know that things are out of our control, no matter how successful or powerful you may be in this life. Something's going to come down the road that you can't control. And so as humans, we want rocks in our lives. And that's part of why we turn to Jesus, because Jesus offers to be the rock of our salvation. He says, "I will be certain. I will never leave you or forsake you." But the thing that we're talking about this morning is that Jesus himself doesn't just offer to be the rock of salvation for you. He wants you to become a rock yourself. I remember back when I was a senior in college, it was coming out of the first year we had had after COVID. And COVID year at college obviously was a difficult time. It was difficult for everybody everywhere, but it was difficult in college because how do you have a college community when you can't have a community, right? I remember the year that the COVID was actually happening, we were all in isolation, I was the men's dorm chaplain. And it was hilarious in a sick way because everybody was in the dorm. They weren't out and about, they had to be in the dorm. But I couldn't go see any of them, even though they were all in one place. So things were interesting in college, especially in terms of leadership and ministry and event planning and things. So 1 year had passed since COVID. So we had the 2021 to 2022 school year. And that was the year everybody was super excited because they said, yes, like quarantine's over, everything's going to be back to normal, everything's going to be great, but things weren't back to normal. And things were actually pretty disappointing on a lot of levels. I got to be a co-pastor of a student church, and everybody was thinking this will be back to the way it was before. But it didn't quite go that easily. It was difficult. It was difficult. People were not as anxious or eager to be engaged, to be involved. And so it was interesting. It was interesting. And there was a lot of disheartenment, discouragement. And so we came to September before the school year started of my senior year in the 2022 to 2023. And I had once again gotten to be the co-pastor of this student church. And we went to, as a student leader, we go to this retreat that happens up in the Blue Mountains by Walla Walla. And we get to be there with all the leadership people that are involved in student leadership on campus. So not just campus ministries with student churches or evening worships or things like that, but also the assembled student body, ASWU. You're there with the CHE, which is Community Outreach and Engagement. You're there with the student missions department and things like that. You're there with everybody who's involved with student leadership on campus. And I remember, I think it was the last night we were there was a worship evening, Vespers, that kind of evolved into a discussion on what we should do this year to make it not like last year. And there were some people who thought we should just totally throw away everything that we did in the past and just try and do something new. And there were some people that thought, no, we can do what we did in the past, and maybe it looks a little different, or maybe it's just everything's going to be different. And everybody had these different levels of optimism. Everybody had different levels of hope. But the one thing that everybody had was this shared sense of discouragement, a sense of burnout. Was very clear from everybody, because if you had been involved in leadership the year before, even if you had just attended the college the year before, it was kind of disheartening to see what you wanted college to be, this fun experience where you're spending time with other people, not work out the way that you thought it would. Especially, you're out of COVID, things should be better now. And I remember everybody was just burnt out on positivity. They were tired of saying, hey, things are going to get better. People were burnt out of just energy. And it was a hard discussion to be a part of. And I walked out of the room as it finished, and we were, again, up in the mountains a little bit, and so I walked off by myself. It was evening. It was dark. I could barely see anything. And I found this creek, which, if you've ever been to Walla Walla, it's called Mill Creek. It runs through the mountains, and it runs right by Camp Tushu, where we were at. And I found a rock, and I sat on this rock, and basically it was dark. There was nobody around, and I had one of those moments. Perhaps you've had one of those before, too, where you just have a moment of silence, a moment of connection, a moment of communion, where you just feel, let me just pour out my heart to God. Nobody's around to judge you or to hear you or to be involved. It's just you and God. And so I did that. I shared all the things that I was feeling frustrated with, comments that I had heard that really disheartened me in this discussion with all the student leaders from across the campus. I just shared all the things that I wanted, all the things that I was afraid of. And I said, God, I don't know if this is going to be another year like last year where there's so much hope and it doesn't work out. I don't know that I can do this. And while this is my specific situation, I know we all experience this feeling, this moment in our lives where we say, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know if this is going to go the way I feel like it might go, if I can do this. And as I sat there pouring out my heart, I heard something. And it wasn't an audible voice. I'm sorry to disappoint you if that's what you were expecting. It wasn't an audible voice, but rather something that I had been hearing that just seemed to grow louder and pulled my attention to it. It was the sound of the water rushing by in this creek, but specifically the water hitting a particular rock that was jutting out of the middle of the creek. It wasn't even a particularly large rock. It's not one that I would have probably trusted to put my foot on if I was trying to get across the water, but there was a rock nonetheless, and it wasn't moving, as rocks often tend to not do. It was just sitting there in the water. And what drew my attention was the sound of the water crashing into it, and also the way that the water kind of glistened as it sparkled off of it. I couldn't see much, but it was enough in the moonlight to see. And while God didn't speak to me verbally in that moment, I believe that God did speak to me in a way of drawing my attention to that rock. Because I realized something as I sat there looking at that rock in the stream. I realized that life is like a flowing stream. Flowing river is the lyric, so I think I said that right. Life is like a flowing stream. It doesn't stop. Life just keeps on coming. As much as it would be fantastic if we could just hit pause on time right now, we could probably figure a lot out, right? We could figure out what would make sense for world peace, for peace in our homes, where all our kids should go to school, what kind of job position we should take, if we should sell our house, this current economy or not, or whatever it looks like. It would be nice if you could hit pause and figure out life right now. But you can't do that. Life keeps coming. Life keeps flowing. Life keeps coming at you, and you can't do anything to stop it. So life is like this stream, and as much as we would love to hit pause, we can't. We can't stop life from going on. And then there are times when it feels like you are helpless in the flow of this stream of life, of time. It doesn't feel, perhaps you can relate to this feeling, it doesn't feel like you're in control. It doesn't feel like you're swimming through life. It feels like you're being thrown downstream, perhaps even drowning, overwhelmed by things coming at you faster than you can even get a foothold to save yourself. It doesn't feel like life is something that you can control. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything but just floating, out of control, helpless. It's probably something you can experience or relate to because this is part of the human experience. It's something we all experience. But what if life didn't have to be that way? What if you didn't just have to float through life? What if you could be like that rock that I saw that night, standing in the river, standing strong amidst the current of life? And that became my prayer that night as I sat by the creek. I prayed and I asked God, God, let me be a rock in your river. Let me be a rock in your river. As I stand in life, let your washing power of the water of life flow over me to give me energy. So maybe this year turns out great. Maybe it's discouraging again, but give me the strength to stand no matter what. I said, let me be a rock in your river, God. Let me have the ability to stand strong no matter what comes down this river of life towards me. Maybe there'll be some times that a current jostles me a little bit, but I'll still be able to stand because of my relationship, my connection with you. Let me not lose joy and gratitude for all I have. Let me not lose hope and happiness for the things, the blessings that I've been given. Let me not lose the ability to love people around me the way that you have loved me, God. I asked God that night to make me a rock. And I believe that God answered my prayer. Not only because I ended up having an incredible last year of college, and I got to see my college community come together in a really special way and move forward from a difficult and dark time. So God did answer that prayer. But I also got to continue to see how God answered my faith as I stepped out in faith to turn down a job offer and to say, I want to come work for the Southeastern California Conference. And then I got to see how God continued to answer my faith by saying, I'm going to put you at this church that nobody thinks you should be at. And maybe you still feel that way. I'm sorry. Come talk to me sometime. But I'd love to fix that relationship if that's the case. But I have ended up here, and no matter what this church feels, I have been incredibly blessed in ways that I couldn't even have imagined by being a part of this church, a part of this community. So first of all, thank you to you, but I also am grateful to God because God answered my faith. He affirmed my faith. He made me a rock. This church has been through difficult times, and yet we're still here. We're still here. So whether you realize or not, perhaps you're still here because you are a rock. It's interesting how, continuing with that analogy just a little bit, God doesn't pull you out of the river when you ask him to. He doesn't pull you out and say, all right, I'll let just you hit a pause on time. I'm going to take you out and let life just continue on, and we'll give you a break for a little bit. God doesn't do that. But what he does say is that as you're in the stream of life, as things are happening to you that you can't control, I'll give you the strength to stand. All you need is a relationship with me. And that's the key for this morning as I reflect on what we've been discussing, what we've been reading in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. That everybody is trying to survive. We're all swimming, trying to figure out the best way to float. Maybe some people started out on a life raft, and so they had it a little bit easier than others, but maybe they hit a rock and something threw them off of it. Whatever it may be, we're all trying to survive. Maybe you're trying to survive by making more money. Maybe you're trying to survive by making more friends. Maybe you're trying to survive by growing your own intelligence. Maybe you're trying to survive by perfecting human systems of government. Whatever it is, the problem is that all of those methods have been tried for millennia, and yet we're still here. Nobody has figured it out. Life still goes on. Troubles still come. And whether you're Jeff Bezos or whether you're Mother Teresa, you're still going to be trying to survive in this river of life. But what if there was a way to thrive? What if there was a way to thrive? What if the people like Mother Teresa and others like her found happiness not through traditional methods trying to survive, but rather through becoming rocks for Christ and through Christ? And that right there, I believe, is the answer. It's not about what you do in life. It's not about what you have in life. It's not about what you know in life. It's about what you want to be, the kind of person that you want to be. And that's the question that I have this morning. What kind of person will you be? Are you going to just float through life? It's okay. Plenty of people are doing it. Are you just going to float through life feeling lost and overwhelmed, out of control, fragile and helpless, without any lack of certainty in your life, in your relationships, in your family, in your financial status? Or are you going to do more? Do you want to be a rock that can stand strong through all that life brings you, all that comes down the river towards you? The way that you do that isn't by trying to stand on your own 2 feet, by building yourself up, but rather by following the path of Peter. And what is that path? Well, Peter really only did one thing. Again, it's an encouragement. Peter only did one thing. He followed Jesus. He entered into a relationship with Jesus. He found a way to spend time with Jesus physically, but you can find a way to do it yourself for whatever works for you. And as he spent time with Jesus, he developed a faith. Not a faith that somebody else told him to have, as Jesus himself spoke to and recognized, but rather a faith that came from the true connection that gave him the confidence to declare who Jesus was. And once he did that, Jesus looked at him and he said to Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. And I tell you, you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then Peter, the uneducated fisherman with anger issues, became a rock. Did you know that Peter actually means rock? You may have known that. Peter's name was Simon, but Jesus literally in this moment calls him Peter. He names him rock, just to drive the point home of the new identity he was giving to this disciple. And it really stuck. Peter went on to become so strong in his faith that he was the first to share the gospel with the Gentiles, people who weren't Jewish. He became so strong in his faith that he was eventually crucified for his conviction. That's how strong his faith was. That right there is rock behavior. That's what a rock looks like when Jesus creates it, when Jesus forms it. And you too can be a rock today. You can be someone who thrives in life, who takes control, who doesn't just feel like they're floating through life. And you can also be a rock for others as well. First, you need the kind of faith that only a relationship with Jesus can provide. Second, let God speak over you the way that he spoke over Peter. Plenty of people believe in Jesus, but only as long as he makes them comfortable. But that's not the way it works. That's not realistic. That's not how God works. If you want to thrive and not just survive in this life, ask God to make you a rock, not to pull you out of the river, but to give you the strength to stand. Pray that your faith and relationship with him, through that, he will sustain you, empower you, and give you the strength to stand. Pray to be a rock today. If God can take someone as problematic and broken as Peter and build his church upon that rock, God can make you a rock today as well. Let us all pray that in the chaos this life can bring, that we may be rocks, that we can stand strong for ourselves and for God, and to be so strong that God can use us as footholds to help the world around us. I pray that for all of us here this morning. Amen.